The land trembled beneath hooves, not the march of one army, nor the orderly tread of a nation's soldiers, but the restless wandering of tribes, fugitives, and mercenaries. Anatolia, once proud and orderly under the Seljuk sultans, had become a broken mirror by the late 1200s. Each shard caught a glint of power, each petty lord claiming kingship, yet none holding true authority. The Mongols thundered down from the east, leaving provinces shattered. From the west, Byzantium, the once mighty heir to Rome, staggered like an old lion, blind and clawless, its fortresses hollow, its treasuries empty. Between them stretched a land of ruins and frontiers, where peasants abandoned fields, towns fell silent, and the shadow of empire gave way to the firelight of warlords. It was a dangerous place to be born, but the perfect place to rise. Among these tribes was one that outsiders barely noticed, the Kei clan of Oghuz Turks, camped near the small town of Sagat. Their tents were few, their flocks modest. They lived not in marble palaces, but in felt yurts. Their warriors rode wiry horses, armed with curved sabers and bows. Yet they had one advantage no empire could purchase: hunger. Hunger for survival. Hunger for conquest. Hunger for something greater than mere survival on the margins of history. From this hunger emerged a man whose name the world would learn to fear: Osman, son of Ertugrul. History remembers him as Osman Gotzi, Osman the warrior. But when he was young, there was no throne beneath him, no crown upon his head. Only a vision. And visions, in an age of broken kingdoms, could become weapons more powerful than steel. Osman's genius was not simply in swinging a sword. It was in knowing where to strike. To his west lay the Byzantine frontier, riddled with crumbling forts and villages left undefended by a decaying empire. To his east, rival Turkish beyliks fought one another in endless feuds. Osman did not waste men in pointless quarrels. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Byzantium, where weakness was ripe and spoils were plenty. But Osman had something greater than strategy. He had faith, and he wielded it as a blade sharper than any forged in iron. To his warriors, he was not merely a tribal chief seeking plunder. He was a Gotzi, a holy fighter for Islam, striking at the infidel as part of a divine struggle. Where others raided for wealth, Osman fought with the fire of destiny. And destiny has a way of gathering followers. They came from scattered tribes, from restless villages, even from distant lands. Men who owned no fields, who carried no inheritance, who sought only purpose. To them, Osman's campfire was not a refuge, but a calling. His raids were more than theft. They were righteous victories blessed with spiritual reward. Every fortress seized, every banner lowered, every Byzantine stronghold conquered was not only a triumph of arms, but of faith. By the year 1299, a story had already begun to whisper through the valleys of Anatolia, that Osman's tribe was no longer just a tribe. It was the seed of something far greater. Later historians would look back and mark this year as the birth of the Ottoman Empire. In truth, it was not a proclamation nor a coronation. No marble hall echoed with the cry of kingship. It was quieter, almost invisible, a flicker in the dark, as a small band of warriors realized they were no longer fighting simply for survival, but for permanence. The people of Sagat could feel the shift. Markets grew busier, raiders returned with richer spoils, and Byzantine villages along the frontier whispered Osman's name with dread. What had begun as skirmishes now felt like conquest. Osman's victories were small, yet each carried the weight of inevitability. Still, danger coiled around every success. Rivals among the Turkish beyliks eyed Osman's growing power with suspicion. Byzantium, though weakened, was not yet dead, and emperors still dreamed of restoring their lands. And above all, the Mongols remained a storm beyond the horizon, a reminder that even the boldest warlord could be crushed in an instant. Yet Osman pressed forward, as if carried by something greater than himself. Legends say he once dreamed of a tree, rising from his chest, its branches stretching across the world, shading continents in its vast embrace. Whether myth or memory, the dream captured the essence of what was beginning. The birth of a dynasty that would outlast kingdoms, outlive crusades, and rise from the ashes of empires to forge one of its own. This is where the story begins. Not with marble, not with crowns, but with a man and his tribe at the edge of two worlds, carving a destiny with fire and steel. The Ottomans were not yet an empire, but the ground was shifting beneath them, and history was about to awaken. The winds of Anatolia carried whispers. Some spoke of Osman's victories as blessings from heaven. Others muttered them as curses. A small tribe was not supposed to grow so bold, not when Mongols ruled the east and Byzantium clung to the west. Yet Osman's banner, a simple crescent raised above his horsemen, became a signal fire on the frontier. And like any flame, it drew not only followers, but shadows. Inside his camp, Osman was no distant monarch. He ate with his warriors, rode at the front of raids, and judged disputes beneath the open sky. To them, he was not untouchable, but a man who shared their hunger and their danger. In the stillness of night, when the fires burned low, Osman carried a weight that none of them could see. To expand meant to provoke. To grow meant to draw enemies closer. The Byzantines were the first to stir. Their frontier lords had grown complacent, but word of Osman's strikes, swift, relentless, blessed with spoils, reached Constantinople. These are not mere raiders. They were a force building permanence. Byzantine commanders began shoring up defenses, calling for reinforcements. But their empire was fractured, their treasuries thin, their armies weary. Fear traveled faster than their messengers. By the time they prepared, Osman was already gone, riding through the forests, vanishing into the hills, leaving smoke and broken walls in his wake. Yet for every village Osman won, another bey to the east clenched his fists. Rival Turkish rulers looked at the Kei clan with suspicion. Why should one tribe claim the mantle of holy war when all fought beneath the same banner of faith? To them, Osman's rise was not destiny, but arrogance. Alliances were made in whispers, promises spoken in secret chambers, blades sharpened for future betrayal. And still Osman pressed on. His victories were small, yet each carried the weight of story. The fall of a lonely fortress, the capture of a Byzantine commander, the submission of a nearby village. To the world beyond Anatolia, these were minor skirmishes. But to his men, they were proof that God favored their cause, that Osman's dream was no fantasy. Then came the story that turned whispers into thunder. At a feast in the town of Sagat, Osman is said to have fallen into a deep vision. He dreamt that a great tree grew from his chest, its branches shading the earth, its roots drinking from rivers that fed continents. When he awoke, he told his followers that the dream was no illusion, it was destiny. Whether the vision was truly seen or crafted later by chroniclers matters less than the effect it had. Among his warriors, it became prophecy. Among his rivals, it became fear. But dreams do not conquer cities. Swords do. And so Osman looked to Bursa. It was not merely a city. It was the jewel of the region, a hub of trade, wealth, and culture. Its markets spilled with silks, spices, and silver. Its walls glistened with Byzantine stone. For a leader whose people lived in tents, Bursa represented permanence. If Osman could seize it, he would no longer be a raider. He would be a ruler. Yet the city was far stronger than any fortress he had faced. Its defenses were high, its garrison well-trained, its coffers deep. To challenge Bursa outright was madness. Osman knew this, but he also knew that empires are not won by patience alone. He began to tighten the noose slowly. Raids along trade routes, blockades on supply caravans, alliances with discontented locals. The siege was not swift, but suffocating. Bursa began to starve long before its gates were breached. As Osman's forces encircled the city, another threat rose, one far more dangerous than stone walls. Rivals in Anatolia whispered of joining against him. Byzantine envoys courted alliances with jealous Beyliks. Even among Osman's own commanders, doubts surfaced. Could their small tribe truly hold a city that even Byzantium had struggled to control? Osman's answer was not shouted in speeches, but shown in resolve. He pressed forward, patient and unyielding. For him, conquest was not just survival. It was the unfolding of a vision that no man, no wall, no rival could extinguish. And so the stage was set. The starving city of Bursa trembled within its walls. Rivals sharpened their blades in the east. The Byzantines prayed for deliverance. And Osman, the son of a frontier chief, once ignored, now undeniable, stood ready to strike at the heart of history. The flame he had kindled was growing into fire. But every fire, no matter how divine, threatens to consume more than it was meant to. The siege dragged on like a wound that would not close. Bursa's walls stood tall, defiant, but the lifeblood within was fading. Grain stores emptied, wells ran foul, and hunger gnawed at the bellies of its people. Each caravan Osman intercepted tightened the invisible rope around the city's neck. What began as raids became a stranglehold. Winter fell hard. Snow glazed the hills around Bursa, and Osman's warriors huddled in their tents, shivering, their cloaks stiff with frost. Yet still they stayed. They could have turned back, abandoned the dream, returned to their pastures. But they did not. For in their leader's eyes burned something fiercer than the cold. The certainty that this city would fall, that it must fall, if their destiny was to live. Osman himself, however, was weakening. The long years of battle had carved deep into his body. His steps grew slower, his nights restless with fever. Chroniclers later whispered that he fell ill during the siege, perhaps too ill to command, perhaps already dying. Whether true or not, his warriors began to fight not only for conquest, but for him. Every arrow loosed at Bursa's walls was loosed for Osman's vision, his dream of the tree that would one day shadow the earth. At last, in the year 1326, the city faltered. Exhausted and starving, Bursa surrendered. Its gates opened not to Byzantine emperors, but to the son of a frontier chief. The tents of nomads gave way to a capital of stone. Markets bustled, mosques rose, coins were struck bearing the Ottoman name. Bursa was more than a city. It was legitimacy, permanence, the beating heart of a newborn empire. Yet as the city bowed, Osman himself faded. He did not live to see the full glory of his conquest. Legends say he gave the order that Bursa become the seat of his dynasty, but he did not walk its streets as a ruler. The triumph of his life was crowned by the shadow of his death. In that moment, the paradox of empire revealed itself. Every victory carried a cost, and every dream demanded sacrifice. The mantle passed to his son, Orhan. Unlike his father, Orhan was not a rider of endless frontiers, but a builder. Where Osman wielded the sword, Orhan wielded the pen, the seal, the coin. He organized courts of justice, established taxation, and minted currency. He gave structure to the fire his father had lit. But Orhan inherited not only a city, but also its enemies. Bursa's fall sent shockwaves across Anatolia and Europe. Rival Beyliks fumed at the audacity of a once obscure tribe. Byzantium, humiliated and fractured, scrambled to contain this rising power. Yet in desperation, the empire's rulers turned to a gamble. They offered alliance. Orhan, pragmatic where his father was relentless, accepted. He married a Byzantine princess, weaving bloodlines into politics, peace into power. To some of his warriors, this was a betrayal, the daughter of the enemy welcomed into their tents. But to Orhan, it was strategy. Empire was not built on raids alone. It needed recognition, even from the hands of its foes. And then fate, as if impatient, cracked the world open once more. In 1354, an earthquake shook the fortress of Gallipoli on the European shore of the Dardanelles. Its walls crumbled, its defenses shattered. The Byzantines, weakened and disorganized, could not reclaim it. Orhan's forces seized the opportunity. Ottoman banners rose where none had stood before on European soil. It was more than a conquest. It was a doorway. With Gallipoli in their hands, the Ottomans crossed from being an Anatolian power to becoming a bridge between continents. Their horsemen now looked not only east and south, but west, into the Balkans, into the heart of Europe itself. Yet with new horizons came new shadows. The tribes who once dismissed Osman now feared Orhan. Balkan lords whispered of coalitions. Byzantium, once an uneasy ally, began to dread the monster it had helped create. And within the Ottoman ranks, a new kind of army began to form. Men torn from their families, raised as warriors loyal only to the Sultan. The Janissaries. The Ottomans had crossed a threshold. No longer were they simply survivors of a broken age. They had become a storm, expanding beyond borders, reshaping the map. But storms, once unleashed, do not discriminate. They devour everything, enemies, rivals, even those who summon them. The death of Osman, the rise of Bursa, the step into Europe, all were victories. Yet beneath the triumph ran a darker truth. Every step forward drew them deeper into the jaws of history, where glory and ruin are always intertwined. The city of Bursa had given the Ottomans permanence. Gallipoli had given them direction. But it was Murad I, son of Orhan, who gave them destiny. He moved the capital to Edirne, a jewel of Europe, closer to the Balkan frontiers. From its stone palaces, the young sultan could see beyond Anatolia. The empire was no longer a frontier tribe with holy fire. It was a machine. And Murad was the one to sharpen its teeth. His greatest weapon was not the cavalry of his forefathers, but an army unlike any the world had seen, the Janissaries. Torn from Christian families through the system of Divserm, these boys were converted, trained, and forged into warriors who knew no loyalty but to the Sultan himself. Their discipline was terrifying, their silence before battle unnerving. They did not fight for plunder, nor for tribe. They fought as a new breed, the instruments of empire. This innovation brought fear. To the Balkan lords, the Ottomans were no longer raiders, but conquerors. To Murad's own people, whispers spread. Could an army of once Christian children truly defend the faith? Yet Murad pressed forward. His answer was written not in words, but in victories. The Battle of Maritsa, 1371, was one such answer. A coalition of Serbian and Bulgarian lords gathered a vast army, determined to break the rising power before it swallowed them whole. But under cover of night, Murad's forces struck. The Ottoman cavalry poured across the river, cutting through the enemy camp before dawn had broken. When the sun rose, the ground was slick with blood. The Balkans shook. Entire kingdoms bent the knee. Still, the victories brought no peace. With each conquest, Murad's empire grew heavier on his shoulders. Tribute poured in from vassal states, yet rebellion was never far. Christian knights whispered of crusade. Balkan peasants muttered curses under their breath. And even within Murad's council, voices asked, how long can this expansion last before the empire devours itself? It was during these years that Murad's face hardened. Chronicles say he grew more silent, more solitary. At times, he rode into battle with the fire of a conqueror. At others, he lingered in prayer, kneeling for hours as if seeking forgiveness for the weight of lives sacrificed to his dream. One night, as torches flickered across the encampment near Kosovo, an advisor dared to speak, "Sultan, the Balkans will never stop resisting." Their princes swear loyalty by day, yet plot rebellion by night. Perhaps the empire asks for too much blood. Murad's reply was quiet, but sharp as steel. An empire that does not demand blood is not an empire. It is a pasture, and pastures are devoured by wolves. By the late 1380s, the wolves had gathered. The Serbian Prince Lazar rallied allies, determined to strike one final blow that might break the Ottoman tide. Knights, nobles, and peasants alike took up arms, their banners rising beneath the shadowed hills of Kosovo. It was more than a battle. It was a last stand for their world. For Murad, it was the test of a lifetime. His Janissaries were disciplined, his cavalry feared, but this was no small coalition to be scattered at dawn. This was a crusade in all but name, a wall of steel determined to halt him. And so both armies faced each other across the fields of Kosovo, the wind carrying prayers from two faiths, two destinies. The Ottomans, hardened, silent, prepared to fight for their sultan. The Serbs, defiant, resolved to die for their land. The stakes could not have been greater. If Murad fell, the empire his father and grandfather had built might crumble. If Lazar lost, the Balkans would kneel in chains for generations. As the sun sank on the eve of battle, Murad walked among his men. Some chroniclers claim he removed his crown, speaking not as sultan, but as one warrior among thousands. "If I die tomorrow, do not mourn me. Mourn only if our cause falters. For empires do not die with men. They die when the dream is abandoned." His words hung in the night, carried on the smoke of campfires. The men listened in silence, their eyes fixed on the dark horizon where thousands of enemy torches glimmered like stars. The dawn would bring slaughter. The fields of Kosovo would drink the blood of kings. And in that moment, Murad knew, empires are not forged by victories alone, but by the wounds they endure. Tomorrow, he would either stand as the master of Europe's gates, or as a martyr whose death would mark the empire forever. The morning of Kosovo was drenched in silence. No beat sang, no wind stirred the banners. Two armies faced one another across the mist, the Ottomans on one side, the coalition of Serbs, Bosnians, and allies on the other. Between them lay not just land, but the future of the Balkans. When the first horn sounded, silence broke like glass. The clash was thunder. Cavalry charged, arrows darkened the sky, and the screams of men carried across the plain. The Janissaries marched with cold precision, their curved blades flashing. Serbian knights, armored in steel, crashed into the Ottoman line with fury. Spears snapped, horses fell, mud turned to blood. The battle raged until the earth itself seemed to groan. Neither side gave way. The Ottomans pressed forward, the Serbs resisted with desperate valor. Hours stretched into eternity, and then a moment that would become legend. A Serbian knight, Miloš Bilić, slipped through the chaos. Whether as prisoner feigning surrender or as assassin concealed by dust, the chronicles disagree. But what they agree upon is this: he reached Sultan Murad, and with one strike, he pierced the heart of an empire. The Sultan fell. Shock rippled through the Ottoman lines. For a moment, the army teetered on the edge of collapse. Murad's death could have shattered everything. Years of conquest, the fragile edifice of empire. But before despair could root, a voice rose. Bayezid, son of Murad, seized command with fire in his veins. Known as Yildirim, the thunderbolt, he did not mourn, he struck. Ordering swift counterattacks, he rallied the Janissaries, drove the cavalry forward, and crushed the remaining Serbian forces. By nightfall, the field was silent. Both kings lay dead, Lazar of Serbia executed, Murad fallen by the assassin's blade. The ground drank the blood of monarchs and peasants alike. Kosovo had no victors, only survivors. Yet from that ruin, Bayezid emerged sultan. His rule began not in coronation, but in carnage. And Bayezid burned with ambition. Unlike his father, tempered by prayer and hesitation, Bayezid was relentless. He expanded into the Balkans with fury, breaking armies, swallowing kingdoms. Cities bent before him, tribute flowed, and Europe trembled. His ambition reached even to Constantinople itself, which he besieged, threatening to extinguish the 1,000-year-old empire of Byzantium. But fire burns not only outward, it consumes. In 1402, Bayezid faced an enemy greater than any crusader, greater than any Balkan lord. From the east rode Tamerlane. Timur, the scourge of God, master of Central Asia. His armies were a moving wall of iron, his tactics brutal and brilliant. Two conquerors, both claiming destiny, now collided at the plains of Ankara. The battle was merciless. Bayezid's forces, stretched thin, faltered under Timur's relentless cavalry. Vassals deserted. Dust and heat suffocated the field. When the sun set, the thunderbolt was broken. Bayezid was captured alive. Legends say Timur kept him in a cage, paraded before his men like a beast. Whether myth or truth, the humiliation was undeniable. The Sultan who had nearly broken Constantinople now sat in chains. The Ottoman Empire, undefeated for more than a century, cracked. Bayezid's sons turned upon one another, each clawing for the throne. Brothers fought brothers, provinces rebelled, vassals defected. The empire, once roaring with momentum, dissolved into civil war. It was called the Interregnum, a decade of chaos, 1402 to 1413. The dream Osman had nurtured, the victories Orhan had built, the blood Murad had spilled, all seemed ready to collapse into dust. And yet, even in this darkness, the ember did not die. Because history has a cruel rhythm. Empires do not end in one defeat. They linger, stumble, fracture, and sometimes rise again. But on that field at Ankara, with Bayezid in chains and the Ottoman world unraveling, the story seemed over. The mighty empire that had risen from tents, crossed into Europe, and broken kings, now faced its first death. The plains of Ankara reeked of smoke and despair. Where once Bayezid had stood proud, only silence remained. His armies scattered, his throne shattered, his sons circling like vultures. The thunderbolt's fire had burned too fiercely, and now it guttered out in chains. The empire seemed finished. Anatolia fractured into rival beyliks, each reclaiming lands the Ottomans had once devoured. In the Balkans, tribute faltered, vassals broke free, and whispers of revolt spread. Even within the Ottoman family, blood turned against blood. Bayezid's sons, Suleiman, Musa, Isa, and Mehmed, tore the land apart in civil war, each claiming to be sultan. The dream Osman had ignited, the permanence Orhan had forged, the destiny Murad had carried into Kosovo, all of it seemed to collapse into nothing more than dust. But history has a cruel mercy. Empires rarely vanish cleanly. They stumble, fracture, and sometimes, out of ruin, find a way to endure. Among Bayezid's sons was one who did not blaze with ambition like Suleiman, nor rage with vengeance like Musa. Mehmed, quiet and calculating, fought not only with the sword, but with patience. He knew the empire could not survive another decade of fratricide. If it was to live, it needed more than conquest. It needed healing. For 11 bitter years, the Interregnum, Anatolia was consumed by war. Brothers slaughtered brothers, villages burned, thrones rose and fell. Each time Mehmed stumbled, he returned. Each time a rival claimed victory, he waited for the cracks to show. Slowly, carefully, he cut through the chaos, one brother at a time. At last, in 1413, the bloodshed ended. Mehmed stood alone, Sultan, but he inherited not an empire, a corpse. Provinces had slipped away. The treasury was hollow. Enemies circled, His task was not to conquer new lands, but to gather the broken bones of what remained and breathe life back into them. And so Mem began not with war, but with order. He restored the Timar lands, binding cavalry once more to the state. He strengthened the Janissaries, but tempered their power with loyalty. He re-established the courts, the coinage, the taxes, not as tools of tyranny, but as the sinew of survival. He reached out with diplomacy as much as with armies. To the Byzantines, to the Balkan lords, even to rival Muslim powers, he offered stability instead of fire. Slowly, the world began to see the Ottomans not as a fading shadow, but as a phoenix clawing back from ashes. For the men who had fought through civil war, this was not glory. It was exhaustion, but exhaustion can be a foundation. Under Mehmed, the empire regained its breath. The frontiers quieted. The people, weary of blood, began to believe again. And in that fragile moment, the Ottomans proved something greater than conquest. They proved resilience. By the time Mehmed died in 1421, the empire had been reborn. Not yet the juggernaut it would become under his successors. Not yet the terror of Europe, but alive. Strong enough to dream again. History would later remember Osman's vision of the tree. Branches shading the world, roots feeding continents. In the chaos after Ankara, it seemed that tree had been hacked down. But under Mehmed, a sapling grew once more from the stump. And in time, its branches would stretch farther than Osman himself could have imagined. The story of the Ottoman Empire did not end in 1402. It endured for centuries more, rising, conquering, faltering, rising again, until it shaped the fate of 3 continents. Yet the first chapters, from the hunger of Osman to the quiet resolve of Mehmed I, hold the essence of empire itself. Not marble palaces, nor endless victories, but this, that power is fragile. Destiny demands sacrifice, and only those who can rise from their own ashes truly endure. So remember this, the Ottomans did not begin as an empire. They began as exiles, as raiders, as dreamers standing on the edge of collapse. They survived defeat, betrayal, and ruin, and still they rose. The plains of Anatolia have long since grown silent. The banners of Osman, Orhan, Murad, Bayezid, and Mehmed have faded into dust. But their shadow remains, in the maps they redrew, in the battles they fought, in the truth that empires, like men, live and die not once, but many times. And if you walk the ruins of Bursa, the stones of Edirne, or the fields of Kosovo, listen closely. The ground still whispers the same lesson. Glory is fleeting. But those who rise from ruin carve their names into eternity.